Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Incognito series, casual psychedelic conversations on cognitive liberty.
What's the title of your podcast?
Oh, it's Incognito, and that'll be explained in the last 10 minutes. So it follows 10-minute cycles. The first 10 is about just psychedelics in general. The second 10 is about sustainability, whatever that means to you. And then the third part is about the actual podcast name. So, without further ado, Joya Halls, hello, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Care to introduce yourself and tell everyone listening what you do, more about your stuff?
Sure. My name is Joya. I have been volunteering in the psychedelic space for the last year and a half or so. I currently run a naturopath clinic because I really believe in plant medicine. It's a science-based clinic, so there's no crystals, no Reiki, no outside science type of thing that we're doing at our clinic. Before getting into this other plant medicine, I worked in the cannabis industry, medical cannabis mostly, for like 6.5 years or so. And yeah, I've just always been like an advocate patient, even before getting into cannabis and psychedelics and plant medicine. I worked at a dependency clinic. My father had MS, and I witnessed his decline struggles as a patient and being in a nursing home and what he dealt with there. So yeah, I've just always been a patient advocate, and I guess that's what's bringing me to talk to you.
Yay, advocacy, helping people. I love it. And you are very accomplished in terms of the work that you've done in the cannabis space, right? It doesn't seem like many people have that Joya touch.
I guess you could say that, yeah. I think it's because where I started at the industry. I got into medical cannabis right when licensed producers were starting up. I worked at Afria, which was, I don't know, 7 years ago or something, 6 years ago. When they had, I think we had 5 people in the patient care center. We were really just starting it up, and I helped them develop their policies, and I worked with veterans a lot at Afria, figured out how to get them coverage for cannabis, and saw their struggles as well. So yeah, I think I guess because I've touched a lot of patient files firsthand, and it's interesting. Even recently, I've been with some of the groups here with for psychedelics. Some of the veterans that have reached out remember my name from the cannabis industry. And I'm like, well, I guess there is probably one Joya in this area. But they're like, oh, I totally remember you. You helped me with my cannabis. And I was like, oh yeah, that's fantastic.
Nice. So just a broad question, and there's no specific answer, but when you were working in cannabis and you were helping, these veterans access medical cannabis, do you feel like there's more or less promise with psychedelic medicine than cannabis with the populations that you work with?
Well, I think it depends really on what you're treating. I see psychedelics, people are more focused on the research with psychedelics. I think probably because it is maybe like one chemical or one compound, versus in cannabis, you're not just looking at THC, CBD, there's a zillion other cannabinoids, there's terpenes, and we're not quite sure if there's an entourage effect. I think that because they can look at just one thing like LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, if you want to call it a psychedelic, because they can study that thing specifically, I think that it shows more promise as far as getting it to be a covered or regulated drug. And I see too, maybe it's the stigma behind cannabis. I don't know. There's just a lot of pushback on cannabis as a medicine. And so, yeah, I think with psychedelics though, that these individual chemicals can help, and they're easier to study.
Yeah, I guess the lack of complexity with the endocannabinoid system that we still don't even fully understand. Like, it helps that you can study this and you kind of know what's going on before you get into it.
Right, exactly. I mean, with psychedelics, you're like, oh, okay, this hits the serotonin receptor. And so we already know about the serotonin receptor. We always have drugs that hit that. And so that helps because there's already a foundation, whereas the endocannabinoid system is like, interesting, what is this? And we're just still learning about it. So I think targeting certain cannabinoids and researching them individually just takes a lot more time and effort. Whereas I think these other chemicals, they can look at exclusively.
Fair enough. Speaking of these other chemicals, what's your favorite psychedelic and why?
So my favorite would be, it really depends, honestly. Depends on what is being looked at or treated, or if it's recreational versus working through something. For creativity, mushrooms, 100%. I just have found that it's opened my eyes to color again, which maybe makes sense, but like my living space is way more vibrant than when, I don't know, say 2 or 3 years ago when I was just, living my life and working my way up the chain at work and, mundane everyday stuff. Whereas now it's like, no, I need vibrance, I need creativity, I need color, I need artwork. So for creativity, mushrooms for sure. Also, I think if you're doing some type of therapy, I started psychotherapy like 1.5 years. I found that they've helped me open up as well. But MDMA is it's just a totally different animal, I find. It's like warmth and wholeness. And if you're feeling, for me anyway, if you're feeling any lack of something, like something's missing or I feel off about something, I feel that the MDMA kind of makes you feel whole again, if that makes sense. I say that, I grew up in a religious home, and we would talk about the Holy Spirit filling you and this overwhelming joy that comes from the joy of the Lord. I would say it's like that. The joy of the Lord, or like a fullness, warmth. It's just, that's been incredible. So like during COVID, I live alone, I'm solo, no children, my family's not even in the same city, nothing. Yeah. So when you're feeling that lack, you're feeling isolated, this warmth can take over and be like, yeah, it's okay in the world still, and it's interesting. Like, I don't even have to have my daily coffee the next day because I just feel so full. Like, it's incredible.
That's amazing. And it kind of helps you, I guess, sort of unearth, that strength from within rather than needing it from an external source in a sense.
Yeah, and it's great because it gives you that stability on your own, I really do feel like we all work together in this world, but we are our own individual self. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is to be able to count on yourself and rely on yourself. And these chemicals, drugs, whatever, help you just look internally.
Yeah, without having that, the barrier of the other voices or even your own voice, like getting in the way of telling you what's up.
Totally. Like, you don't need someone else's approval, right? Have your own self and you believe in yourself and you're like, no, I'm totally one. I'm whole on my own. It's pretty good.
Absolutely. That's a massive coffee, Joya.
Can I just, this is third, second? Yeah.
Nice. I find it past 2, I start getting the so stick with one on a lazy Sunday for today. The second 10 minutes of this podcast, we kind of just talk about sustainability and what that means to you. So without a leading question, you know, when I say the word sustainability, what comes up?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about psychedelics as a medicine, obviously we have to jump through hoops, right? We have to get it regulated. We have to go through processes and clinical trials, and in order to have it consistent, maybe we do have to make it synthetic, but do we make it just an individual molecule synthetic, or do we do like a full fungi synthetic version of a mushroom? Sustainability, I think, in order to have access for everyone, we would have to do a synthetic route. I believe too, that's the only way to get it regulated. You know, like we run into with cannabis, it's not a covered drug. There's no DIN number. Well, yeah. I think that in order to get something like psilocybin or magic mushrooms to be considered a medicine, they're going to have to make it synthetic. But I think too, they're so cheap to grow that that's a route to look at as well. What are you drinking?
It's just smoothie.
That's huge. You were just, what's like, this is nothing. But I think too, so I think that sustainability, in order to have something last, you're going to have to make it something regulated. Yeah. I mean, with other things like MDMA isn't something that you can grow. So the only way to keep it around is to have labs produce it. And the only way to have it pure and know that you're not getting something else in it is to have a trusted source, right? Like a government source or a government regulated source. Yeah.
The big bad government.
Yeah, I know, it's unfortunate. The government does get a lot of slack, but at the same time, like the government is the ones looking at legalizing or at least decriminalizing. You know, in BC they're looking at, or Vancouver they're looking at decriminalizing. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we have a government in place in Canada for a reason. We're allowed to vote, and I hope everyone exercises their right to vote. And that's the type of place that we do live in. We have free healthcare for a reason. So along with the negatives come positives, and that's just kind of how it works.
Yeah, and you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like, you know, a lot of people were really, and I mean, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes maybe like, you know, give them like a year to figure it out. They were really critical of the cannabis rollout, you know, how it came to be and how maybe it wasn't a fully sustainable implementation of the way things should have been. So do you think that those kind of lessons and those, you know, learnings from the cannabis industry are gonna kind of transition themselves into a more sustainable, you know, long-term regulatory framework for psychedelics?
I think that they're different because of the approach they're looking at psychedelics. I don't know, I really don't know many people who are saying we need to make these legal recreationally. You know, the groups I'm involved with are looking at them for therapy, for PTSD, anxiety, depression, and that's the mental health issue. You know, that's more what they're focused on. But I do think as that becomes a norm, then maybe recreational use or, you know, open use will be available. So I don't know if they're gonna look at anything from the cannabis industry and the way it was rolled out. But it's funny that people complain about that because, like, would you have rather it just be completely illegal still, or start with a pretty crappy rollout and then them work out their issues during it, but at least it's still legal, you know? I think that's something people don't consider with the cannabis industry. Would you rather it just be illegal still, you know?
Well, and it could that a lot of the people that are very, very critical on the regulatory framework benefit the most from it being illegal, you know?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think with back to cannabis, people who were, you know, maybe they were doing things in a caring, healthy, restricted way, even though it was an illegal market, they were still, you know, keeping everything sterile. And but not everyone in the illegal market works that way, and not everyone in the illegal market cares about the end user. So that's something that I think the, you know, the people who didn't like cannabis regulations and rollout, they have to remember, you're the one off. The people that are in it just to make money don't care about the patients.
Yeah, very true. And I mean, you know, hopefully, like because there is like a lot of, you know, people that are doing plant medicine work underground, you know, there's even ayahuasca churches in Canada now where you can like legally consume it, right? So, you know, it's not to say that it's never been about the patients, but, you know, I do agree that, and, you know, I've always agreed with, you know, decriminalizing all drugs is just gonna benefit everyone because you have less burden on the healthcare system with negative side effects. You have less, you know, organized crime and people making money off of subpar drugs, you know, less burden on the justice system. And then, and this is where like I like to take the conversation and make people think about the really long-term, you know, effects of drug decriminalization is, you know, what happens when you have a, you know, healed society that doesn't, you know, feel this sort of negative burden of, you know, it being illegal, right? What happens to cognitive productivity? You know, where do these populations start contributing rather than detracting from our societal fabric? And like in those terms, it can get pretty.
Yeah, I think a major way to sell decriminalization, part of a volunteer group, and one of the things we're working on is drug policy, and a one-pager to hit up MPs with about drug policy, decrim. It's unfortunate, but if you attack or your mode of getting into government and talking to them about it is, if you go into it about finances, that's when they care. It's not necessarily about the health of the nation or the mental health of the nation or the struggles or the suicide rate or whatever. It's about money for them. So if you can show that if you show that decriminalization, you know, helps with things like people in prison or people living off the system or the amount of money wasted on court cases for minor possession charges and that type of thing, that's when you get government's attention by addressing the financial burden of it.
Which is, you know, an important knowledge gap. And, you know, like, if that's the game you got to play to get where you want to go, play the game. Become the best.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you want to
That's exactly it. I mean...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it is unfortunate, but I mean, that's just part of life, you know. Growing up, I never looked at things that way, but it really is. The government isn't, as a whole, isn't a person, isn't one, you know, it's a caring body. It's the government, it's an entity. So that's what it comes down to. It's a business and they need to get financial risk versus, you know, benefits. So, yeah. So
can you tell us a bit more about the psychedelic volunteer organizations that you're working at? And, you know, like you mentioned the one-pager, but what else are you up to?
Okay, so I volunteer for a group called the Canadian Centre for Psychedelic Science. They're based out of Toronto. I met the guys a year and a half ago. Oh my gosh, yeah, year and a half ago maybe, at a Mapping the Minds conference. It
was pre-COVID.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, that we met online because I saw one of the guys, his name's Rotem Petranker. He presented his research at Mapping the Minds conference, which is a great conference. Whoever sees this or listens to this should do that every year. So I saw the research and I was like, I really am interested in this microdosing study and stuff that you're looking at. I'd love to be part of your group and help however I can. I'm not a scientist, but I totally believe in what you're doing. So I bugged him. I emailed him a few times and he was like, no, we don't really have it. I'm like, man, I will do whatever. Do you need your floor swept? I'll lick envelopes. Like, what can I do to support your cause, you know? So I took over just doing basic social media stuff for them. And now I answer the requests from their website too. And that's where I get so many messages from people who are desperate, you know, a father of a 15-year-old who's tried to kill herself 4 times. Can we help her? Veterans who are, you know, cannabis didn't work for them. And they're like, especially during COVID, they're on their last straw. What can they do? A year and a half ago or so, the questions were like, hey, I'm interested in volunteering for your study. Get in touch with me. And I want to be part of your study because we're doing a microdose wellness study. But now it's turned into, I need a resource. I don't know who to talk to. I'm freaking out. This is, you know, things are adding up and stacking up my shoulders. And now it's turned into me referring them to, you know, Therasil or Field Trip or whatever clinic or group that I can to help them get help. It's interesting to look at how things have changed over the last year. Maybe it is because of COVID, or maybe it's because of the popularity of psilocybin or in the new psychedelics. But yeah, people are really reaching out for that. So what I used to do was just like social media posts, but now it is more turning into directing people towards groups that can help them. Even American veterans getting in touch because over there, they don't all have access to cannabis. And there are some psychedelics groups that help veterans in the States. So yeah, it's been really interesting that what's changed with them. But they have a study that's going to be starting, Health Canada approved, wellness study for psilocybin microdosing.
Oh, cool. Is that Therasil, right?
Pardon me?
Is that Therasil, or these are the guys that you're working with, the Canadian Psychedelic?
No, these are the guys that I'm working with. No, this is a Canadian Centre for Psychedelic Science. Cybin has sponsored them. And yeah, so it's been interesting to watch how Health Canada moves at a turtle's pace in order to get things going for some of these people. But at least they're getting it going.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. The other group is MAP Canada that I volunteer with. You know, I volunteer with them. They have a journal meeting that meets once a month where researchers can present their research. We go over the journals and then we can ask questions, and anyone's welcome to join. Again, I'm not a scientist, but it's just something I'm interested in. So yeah, and you don't have to be in Canada to join it. Anyone can. So for them, I do their Reddit. I do like social media posts or whatever for them. Again, just to get the info out there and spark the interest. And then with them, I'm part of the drug policy committee. We've been working on again, like ways to contact MPs and educate them, maybe on drug rescheduling so that more research can happen or people have access. So it's been pretty great to see like all age groups are interested in this. It's not just, you know, early 20s, you know, I'm in my 40s. There's people who are in their 60s who are into this. It's really, really interesting.
That's beautiful. And so if, before we go on to the next minutes, if somebody just got their curiosity and they're interested in this monthly meeting, how do they find that, or how do they find you?
Yeah, so it's called the MAPS Canada Journal Club, and we are on Reddit. We post on Twitter. I mean, I don't know if we'll share links or whatever after this or wherever we're posting things.
Yeah, we'll share.
But yeah. Cool. It's because we don't want people in and spamming while we're in the meetings. You do have to subscribe or like sign up to a list in order to access it, but anyone can. So yeah, there's just a link you can click on to sign up, and then you'll be given the journals for that and the Zoom link for the meeting.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll be happy to share that out and support you guys with what you need there. So on to topic number 3, which is the title of the podcast, Incognito. not the browser tab, but Cognito is the philosophical principle that one's existence is demonstrated by the fact that one thinks, or it's the intellectual process of the self or the ego. So knowing that, and knowing like what we talked about with psychedelics helping you kind of go in and doing that kind of work, how do you see the art of being incognito showing up in your day-to-day life and maybe improving it?
Wow. Huh. Well, it's been interesting. It's really, if you're into self-work and you're into, which hopefully everybody is, but if you're into looking at yourself and wanting to change for the better, and you believe that your brain and your mind and yourself can change, a lot of people are stuck and they think that they're stuck. I think that psychedelics definitely help you open up to that. I don't know. I wish that I had the words to explain. Unless you've lived it, you can't really explain it very well, maybe, with what psychedelics can do for you. And it's funny, I keep going back to like the religious upbringing that I had, but that's how I used to feel about religion. But I think maybe that's just mindfulness on its own, is having these experiences that change your day-to-day, that change your everyday life, and not really seeing that until you're in it. This isn't making sense, but it makes sense to me.
No, I think it definitely does. It makes sense to me because it's like, it's like somebody saying, what's it like doing acid, or what's it like doing mushrooms? I can tell you what it's like for me, but I can tell you it's also going to be very different for you,
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so
I think like,
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, have you noticed, with an intentional psychedelic practice, that it seems like, you've become more in tune with developing lately? Have you sort of gotten to know a little bit more about yourself, about your process of thought, and sort of where you're at when you're thinking about who you are?
Absolutely. Really been so interesting being able to change your thought process, to change. If you see something about yourself, you don't have to just accept it. You have the ability to change. It does take effort. Like I said, I've been in therapy for the last 1.5 years, and CBT, and it's great. I was never allowed to feel negative feelings growing up. I was not allowed to feel anything other than the goodness of the Holy Spirit, if you know what that means, the fruits of the Spirit, which, I mean, it's great things, patience, joy, faith, all these things, but any negative feeling or considered negative, or any anger, frustration, resentment, disappointment, I couldn't demonstrate those. I was not allowed to feel those. I had to, mask them or ignore those feelings. So learning now how to deal with that, those emotions, and letting them out in a healthy way at 42 to do that has been really tricky and interesting. But it's amazing that you can do that. Like, our brain is muscle. We can absolutely train it to go a certain way instead of what we've always done. It just takes time and effort. And I do think that these psychedelics help you expand your mind, open things up, and maybe make you a little more curious to what else you're capable of doing. I've talked to a neuroscientist, psychology professor about things, and it's funny that even someone who knows the brain that well is so closed-minded about abilities of humans, that we can't change, or people get stuck in their way. It's like, wow, I can't believe that someone who knows this stuff so well would be so closed off to our ability. We don't even know what we're capable of until we try it. So let's try it,
Right. Yeah. And like almost self-limiting beliefs and thoughts work, right? Right? But so do the ones where it's like, I can do this. It's that law of attraction where, you know, whether you're in the negative or in the positive in your mind, you're probably going to create that result.
Right, exactly. I mean, if you go into something thinking, okay, no limits, and you have to keep yourself in check because we do doubt ourselves and we do put limits on ourselves. But if you go into something and say, no, I'm just going to be open to this, and, you know, I'll cry my way through it or work my way through it or laugh or dance or whatever you got to do to get through it. Don't limit yourself. And I think that's maybe part of it is people, you know, can these drugs work to treat these conditions or symptoms? Let's try it. Especially now, there's such a desperate need for some kind of rescue for mental crisis. Let's try it. Let's allow people access. And this is part of what our groups are saying. Like, let's allow humans access to things that can change their body, theirs to take care of and be responsible for. Let's give them the access to these drugs to see if it can work for them. Why shouldn't they have the right to these medicines or drugs?
Yeah, I mean, they've got, you know, access to most drugs in the world, but for some reason, the ones that work on your brain, it's a no-no.
Right, especially something like magic mushrooms that grows in a field of like cow poop. You're going to say, no, you can't have access to that? Dude, it's in nature. What are you thinking? And same with cannabis. It's in nature. How can you limit that, you know?
It is. Those rules are horseshit.
Exactly. I mean, maybe these are the same people that bottle water and sell it to us, right? Water, which is a natural resource, but they're going to sell it to us. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to need to rethink this whole thing. Let's start fresh. So I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and for sharing and, you know, just hanging out in general. Is there anything that we didn't really talk about that you wanted to cover before we do a little sign off and where you can find Joya? On Twitter.
Oh yeah, I'm on Twitter. On Twitter, I have the handle Shuck It Trebek, which is like Suck It Trebek from SNL. Right? If you have a Sean Connery voice, it's Shuck It Trebek. And I'm on Instagram too. I don't know if you want to follow that. But one of the things I did want to bring up, because I know a lot of people are struggling during this time, is that the government of Canada, I don't work for the government, by the way, so let's just get that clear. I just appreciate their efforts. So the government of Canada has Wellness Together Canada. It's ca.portal.gs. That is where you can access virtual therapy, text therapy. They have crisis lines, they have kids lines, they have frontline worker lines. So if you're struggling during all of this and you don't know what to do, or whatever time of day it is, you don't want to disturb your friends or family or whatever, you can go on someone. There's for adults, you can text wellness to 741741, and that will have someone respond right away if you're in crisis. For frontline workers, you can text frontline, the same number, 741741. And again, right away, you'll have someone respond to you. You're not alone. Another thing is Ontario has free CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy during this time. It would start online. You start with a text session, I believe, but they do assign a therapist to you. So there's a few different online therapy access groups or whatever that you can do for free during all of this. So again, don't think like I can't afford therapy. There are routes to get you some help if you do need it.
That is a fantastic share. Really, really awesome. I actually didn't even know that. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that somebody watching this will get some benefit from it, and thank you for the important work you do. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks for joining the Incognito series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.